Have you ever noticed how one person's behavior can completely take over your entire mind? For example, someone has been rude to you, and you know for a fact that as a person, that is who they are. They're usually very rude and aggressive and mean by nature, but your brain refuses to let it go. You keep questioning, you keep wondering why that happened, how could he say that to me, why would he say that to me? For example, someone who usually texts you with a lot of emojis just sends you a K today. एंड राइट देयर योर ब्रेन टर्न्स इनटू अ डिटेक्टिव. ये क्या हुआ, ये कब हुआ, ये वाइब शिफ्ट कब हुई, मैंने क्यों नहीं नोटिस किया, डिड आई डू समथिंग रॉन्ग? एंड बिफोर यू रियलाइज इट, यू आर नॉट जस्ट थिंकिंग अबाउट इट, यू आर एनालाइजिंग, यू आर ट्राइंग टू फिगर आउट पैटर्न्स एंड यू आर ट्राइंग टू डिकोड देयर एंटायर साइकोलॉजी कि वो ऐसे क्यों हैं, उन्होंने ऐसा क्यों किया और मेरे साथ ऐसा क्यों हुआ. Today, I want to unbox something that why do we get so obsessed with someone's behavior? Why does some people's actions stay in our brains rent-free? Let's begin with the difficult person. We all know the type, the aggressive colleague, the rude relative, the one everyone warns you about. And it's not that you've not observed it. You've observed them snapping at waiters. You've observed them being dismissive of others. You've observed them being mean to others. And yet, when they are being rude to you, something very strange happens. Instead of trusting the information that you have about them, that they're rude to everyone, you start to personalize the interaction. You begin asking yourselves, उन्होंने ऐसा क्यों किया मेरे साथ, मैंने ऐसा क्या गलत किया? Or you realize it, you're in a loop. The logic is there, but emotionally it feels personal. So what is actually happening inside your brain? There is a fascinating battle that's happening between two parts of your brain. One is the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of your brain. Now this part understands things like some people are just rude and they behave like this with everyone. On the other hand, there is this other part of your brain which acts much faster and louder, and this is your amygdala, the emotional alarm system. So when someone is rude to you, your amygdala doesn't just sees it as bad behavior. It perceives it as a possible threat of social rejection. And for the human brain, social rejection has always been very dangerous. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. For most of human history, survival depended on tribe. So if your tribe rejected you, you would not just end up being lonely. It meant that you lost safety, you lost protection from predators, you lost access to food and shelter. So in other words, social rejection meant serious danger. And your brain still carries that ancient wiring. Now here's the interesting thing. Your brain just doesn't react to obvious rudeness and stuff like that. It also is very, very sensitive to subtle shifts, subtle changes in people's communication. So someone who usually writes okay with an emoji has replied to you as K. Someone who always used to like your stories now sees them but doesn't like them. A friend who used to always reply quickly is now replying after hours of seeing your text, or is replying in much more shorter sentences than they used to probably. Now nothing dramatic has happened, but your brain has identified this shift, this change, and they've again gotten into this loop of investigating why and when did this shift happen. So you read your message again, you go back and scroll back your charts. Like we know in early human groups, relationships were essential for survival. So if someone in your tribe became a little distant, a little less warm, shifted their behavior, if you identified them earlier, it was helpful. Why? Because then you can make changes and make repairs before the damage becomes more serious. But here is where our modern life complicates all of this so much. Today we are surrounded by too many signals. Someone didn't see your message, someone saw it but didn't reply, someone liked your story yesterday but did not like it today. Someone sends a shorter response, someone doesn't reply for hours. So your brain receives all of these possible changes as a sign of threat. And because your brain is wired to protect relationship, it suddenly gets into scan mode. Suddenly what you're doing becomes less important, and what becomes more important is how can I salvage this relationship? And very quickly it deepens something more deeper, the fear of abandonment. And the brain begins to treat this situation as urgent. It wants to resolve this uncertainty. So it'll start to reassure itself. It starts to look for information. It starts seeking reassurances from this other person to ensure and believe that I'm still safe in this relationship. So you'll check with your partner. You'll ask them why they are not replying. You'll ask them again and again कि कुछ गलत तो नहीं हो गया है? Is everything okay? Are you upset with me? The behaviors that are meant to create safety in the relationships can be the behaviors that can sometimes create more tension. When you start asking for more and more reassurances in the relationship, when you start checking on your partner, when you want to be aware of where everyone is at all points in time, What it starts to do is that rather than bringing people close or rather than you being actually safe, it starts to make the other person feel pressured and they probably then withdraw further, which eventually confirms your fear of abandonment. So the system that was evolved to protect the relationships accidentally starts to damage it. But perhaps the most painful situation where we keep getting obsessed and stuck and we keep replaying things again and again are when we see that someone in our life has moved on too quickly. Because when someone moves on too quickly, it can feel like that our place in their life has been erased. And this touches a very deep human fear, the fear of being replaceable. We want to believe that our presence in someone's life has been significant. So when someone moves on easily, the mind starts searching for evidence. Evidence that they miss you. Evidence that they are affected. Evidence that you mattered. Because if we find these signs, then it restores our sense of worth. But here's the difficult truth. Sometimes people move on quickly not because you mattered little to them, but because they cannot tolerate sitting with their discomfort. So some people escape pain by distracting themselves, keeping themselves busy, by filling up the emotional space quickly. In other words, their speed is not always a measure of how little you mattered. Sometimes it's the measure of how difficult it is for them to sit with their own thoughts alone. But your brain doesn't know that. It only sees the surface, and what it sees on the surface triggers that same ancient alarm. Something important has been lost, and we need to understand why. So it brings us back to the real question. Your brain doesn't analyze someone else's behavior because you enjoy overthinking it. Your brain is trying to ask just a simple and an urgent question. Am I still safe in this connection? And the strange thing here is that person and their behavior whom you're obsessing or analyzing have maybe moved on with their day. But you are still here, being in this investigating mode, trying to understand, am I safe or not?